Welcome to the Limitless Legal Nurse Consulting podcast. I'm your host, Anna Gray. The best thing about being a nurse and entrepreneur over the last 25 years are the relationships I've developed and the people I've met. As a legal nurse consultant, I wanted you to hear from those amazing people in the legal and healthcare communities. I wanted you to hear who they are and to celebrate them with me. Get ready to be inspired, informed, and empowered. Let's dive into the Limitless Legal Nurse Consulting podcast. Hey everyone, welcome to the Limitless Legal Nurse Consulting podcast. I have to tell you, I am so incredibly grateful and excited to have our special guest, Pat Iyer, on the show. Pat, thank you so much for spending your time with us here. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Great. Well, I know that and I told you this before we got on, I know that there are so many of us legal nurses out here that want to hear your story, your background. You're you're an icon. I call you like the North Star of legal nursing. So I am looking forward to digging into your story and hearing more about where you started and how you landed where you are today. So, Pat, can you tell us where you're coming from in the state? In what area?
I am in Florida. We are bracing for another hurricane that should be the last one of the season. So we are in the state where it seems to attract the hurricanes.
My goodness. I don't know how you do it, but I hope that you stay safe. So far you have, which is great. And I hope you continue. Hopefully this one won't be so bad as the last one was. Okay, so you're in Florida. Have you always been in Florida?
No, I grew up in the Northeast. And when I sold my full-time legal nurse consulting business in 2015, we already had a house in Florida that we were using just for weeks here and there. And then we became Florida residents after I sold the company, and we retained the house in New Jersey. So we go back and forth. As I explained once to a woman who had never heard the expression, I told her we were snowbirds.
Mm-hmm.
And she stared at me and she started flapping her hands on her side and this bewildered expression on her face. And I thought, maybe not everybody knows that word.
I'm familiar with the snowbirds term on the West Coast. My parents had a place in Palm Springs, and so the snowbirds from Canada would come to Palm Springs in the winter. So I am familiar with that. But yeah, I imagine not everybody is. So I was going to ask you, we're going to talk about that a little bit later on you selling your business. I did read up on that. So I'm curious to see how you ended up in that position. But going back in time, can you share with us a little bit about your schooling, your nursing schooling, where you went and what that was like?
I was given a full scholarship to go to a 3-year diploma nursing school. It was a choice between going to nursing or going into psychology. Mm-hmm. And I received a scholarship to a 4-year program for 1 year. And then I got a full 3-year scholarship for the diploma program. So I went with a program that gave me a full scholarship. And if you can believe it, Anna, the full scholarship for 3 years was $1,000 for all three. That covered my entire diploma education.
That's amazing.
One of the few diploma schools left at that point. The trend was very much away from them. When I finished, I went to University of Pennsylvania for 3 years and got a bachelor's. I went immediately from my diploma program into University of Pennsylvania with a 3-month break. And then after working for 5 years as a staff nurse, I went back to University of Pennsylvania and earned a master's degree. And I had just one course at Columbia University that was a postgraduate course on creating self-learning education. And after spending some time learning the complexities of writing computer programming, I decided that was not me. I would definitely not take up the process of writing code for my employer. It
Right.
was a real eye opener. And now, of course, it's incredibly different world in terms of being able to write code. You can have AI do coding without having ever to know about all those little arcane symbols or
Yeah.
punch cards as
Oh.
we had in graduate school. When we were writing a program, the machine would feed these punch cards in, and then the machine would suddenly magically create the program.
Interesting. Did you have what intrigued you into checking it out? What was the thing that sparked your interest in checking that out?
I had a vice president of nursing who was my boss when I finished my master's degree in nursing. My job was to take charge of the staff development department for the hospital's nursing department.
Mm-hmm.
She was very progressive. She saw early on that she wanted to hire clinical specialists and master's prepared nurses for leadership positions.
Mm-hmm.
And she supported me going for this course. And she also supported my ideas for innovation. When I walked in that hospital, their orientation program consisted of one day. And by the time I left 7 years later, we had a full blown preceptor program. We had a 4-week orientation. We had very clear objectives that needed to be achieved in order to get out of the orientation program and to be evaluated and observed, like passing medications. So she encouraged me, and I was interested in learning about it until I discovered how complex it was.
Right.
And I was not the right person to
Right.
carry that plan out.
Right. But you were interested, which always, the curiosity, I think it always leads you to the next thing. It's like I always say if it goes wrong, at least you learned something from it, and you learned that maybe that was not. But I'm sure what you gained, there was still plenty of value you gained out of that extra piece of education. So you developed this program. You're a natural born educator, clearly. And when you left that position, you were master's trained. What was the next step in your career?
Well, after working there for 7 years, I decided it was time for a change, and I took a job on the other side of the state of New Jersey. We live in New Jersey about 6 miles from the Delaware River, which separates Pennsylvania and New Jersey. And I drove across the state to Perth Amboy, which is on the Atlantic Ocean side of the state, and took a job as a nursing quality improvement coordinator, specifically to help the hospital get through an impending Joint Commission survey for which they felt unprepared. And there was a lot to be done to get the nursing department ready. But after a year of that, I found that driving on basically an interstate with truck drivers tailgating me at 65 miles an hour, I found that wore me down. And I used to take with me cassettes, books on cassettes. They started off as cassettes, then they became CDs. I took these books on cassettes and I would use it to basically anesthetize myself so that I could drive and not get aggravated by these trucks bearing down on me, looking like they were going to run right over the top of my car. And I'd be listening and, oh yeah, being tailgated, but I was involved in the stories. Sometimes I hated to get to the parking lot because I was in a good part in the book and then I had to leave it in order to work. But one of the key things that job taught me was that I could go to continuing education, and my boss approved, for whatever reason, she approved the day off, and I went to a one-day conference taught by a woman named Clarissa Russo, who was a Californian, who taught about career alternatives for nurses. She talked about discharge planning. She talked about quality improvement. She talked about being an expert witness. She talked about a variety of non-hospital roles. And when she discussed the expert witness part, I sat up real straight and said, that sounds fascinating. To go and evaluate medical records, testify in court, teach the jury about what are the standards of care. I had no idea that nurses could do that. So I came back to the hospital and had a nice quiet conversation with the risk manager who was an attorney. And I said to him, Eric, I would love to know how to find attorneys and offer my services as an expert. So he explained to me about Martindale-Hubbell, which at that time were bound journals sitting in county law libraries. Now, of course, it's a website at martindale.com. And those books were outdated, the minute that they were delivered.
Sure.
So it wasn't a particularly efficient system, but it was before websites were real common. And there is, in the state of New Jersey, there was a newspaper that was filled with stories about cases that had been settled or gone to trial. So he said, it's really easy. You just look up who are the attorneys handling nursing malpractice cases, and then you find their contact information in Martindale-Hubbell, and then you send out letters. So I said, okay. I sent out 20 letters. I got immediately 2 calls from 2 defense attorneys, and one of them was going to trial 2 months later, which completely shocked me because I thought I would have to wait, several months before I would have to testify in trial. He hired me in November. The trial was in January.
Wow.
I sent out those letters at the beginning of November. I left that quality improvement job after a year, being tired of all the commuting and then wanting to explore how could I earn money as a self-employed person rather than being on a payroll. So I started getting cases.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I love that backstory. Had you always been kind of, most likely, I'm guessing, yes, kind of an entrepreneurial, the curiosity, I suppose, probably leads into the same entrepreneurial, how can I do this differently? What can I do that's different? Have you always been that kind of um, person interested in business?
It helped to be married to an entrepreneurial husband
Yes.
who set
Yes.
the model.
Yes.
My father was not an entrepreneur. He was a aeronautical engineer for Curtiss Wright, as in the Wright brothers.
Wow.
And my mother joined me in the nursing profession, and she graduated from nursing school 2 weeks after I graduated.
Oh, wow.
She had a healthcare background.
Yeah.
And she worked as an aide and then an LPN and then an RN. And then she got her master's in guidance and counseling. She definitely worked up through the nursing rank, but neither one of them had an entrepreneurial spirit at all. But something said to me that this is worth taking the risk. And my husband's job at that time was quite secure. So it seemed like this is the time to try it.
Yeah. Wow. That's yeah, I've always heard, I had never really heard of entrepreneurship as well. I think I might have surrounded myself with those people, and once you surround yourself with entrepreneurs, it's very easy to get the bug of, what else is out there. So there's usually some influence. That's why I asked the question. So thank you for sharing that. Okay, so you jumped in, you were intrigued with this. How did that first trial go, or how did that first experience go with you being an expert hired on very quickly? Were you terrified?
Well, on a scale from 1 to 10, with 10 being most anxious, I was about a 15.
Yeah.
Driving to the courthouse,
Right.
I was just completely overwhelmed, unsure of myself.
Mhm.
It was, in my evaluation as a defense expert, a pretty straightforward case involving a man who became confused and got out of the hospital and was wandering around the streets in March in his patient gown until a neighbor whose house he went to called the police, and they brought him back to the hospital. And the physician wrote an order for the patient to be restrained with a vest restraint and wrist restraints.
Mhm.
My defendant was an LPN who was not assigned to him. She was on a different wing of the floor. There was an RN assigned to him. So the RN and LPN went in and put him into a vest restraint at the change of shift, but they did not put wrist restraints on. Then the LPN went off to her wing of the floor. The RN was out of the room when this man reached over, and you can imagine this. There's nothing to prevent him from untying the straps of the vest restraint. He leans over both sides, gets himself out of the vest restraint, and then walks across the room, opens up the window, climbs out onto the roof of the hospital and over the edge and lands in front of the emergency department, where they scoop him up and put him in ICU. He's got a fractured pelvis and a head injury, and he ends up surviving those injuries and is discharged to go home and dies 3 months later from his cancer. So there were certainly damages. And the question was, did the LPN have any responsibility? And I argued that all she did was help the RN make sure that he was in his vest restraint. It was up to the RN to look at the order and implement the wrist restraints. The only question that I got asked in cross-examination by the plaintiff attorney was, did the medical record show any evidence that anyone put wrist restraints on? I had to say no.
Right.
And then I was let off the stand. And I was so fascinated by this that I sat in the courtroom for the rest of the testimony, and it went to the jury. And I listened to the judge explain the law to the jury, called charging the jury. And I sat there and took it all in. And then I billed the attorney for those hours that I was sitting in the courtroom, which was completely inappropriate. I learned later I was there for my own curiosity. He
Right.
paid me and didn't quibble with the invoice because the jury came back and said the LPN did nothing wrong. In New Jersey, it's called no cause. There was no cause of liability for her. She got off the hook. The RN, who, by the way, came to court wearing a purple pantsuit, another little detail stuck in my brain because why would you wear a pantsuit to court? Like, couldn't you wear something better than that? But they assessed, I think it was $100,000 against her, which at that time was considered to be a small verdict. And it was because this man was terminally ill. So yes, he did suffer in ICU, but he didn't die because of falling off the roof.
Right.
And I believe that the hospital has since retrofitted its windows to prevent people from being able to climb out of the windows and have a repetition of what happened to this man.
Right. Due to that. That's fascinating. Yeah, I can tell you the first time I was uh on trial, and it was the same thing. My anxiety was at a 15, and I remember finishing, and it was much shorter, and it was very straightforward. It was much shorter than I expected, and I walked out of the courtroom, and I took a big, deep breath. And I was asked, "Would you do that again?" And I said, "I don't know." And then about an hour later, like, you know what? That was fascinating. So it's kind of the same thing. You go through it, and you go, "Wow, that." was fascinating. And if I would have sat in the room if I could, but because it was just so interesting. So I'm glad that you shared that experience with us. So once you went through that, you obviously were hooked to this and wanted more. So what did that look like? How did you pursue more? I think you said that you had gotten 2 phone calls from your letters. How did you continue to pursue that? And what did that look like once you had walked away from really your hospital position?
Well, it was also a different era, Anna. It was in the 1987, 1988, 1989,
Mhm.
where courtrooms and judges were beginning to wake up to the fact that physicians were not qualified to testify about the standard of care for nurses.
Mhm.
Even though they supervised them, even though they wrote orders for them, they did not go to nursing school. They didn't know nursing standards of care. And I was a med-surg expert.
Mhm.
I was in high demand. A nurse who had a publication which I'd co-authored on the nursing process, a master's degree. I was working clinically, so I got past this whole business of, when was the last time you took care of a patient? Oh, it was last weekend.
Right.
And those letters ultimately resulted in cases from all of those attorneys.
Wow.
It's a small community in
Mhm.
New Jersey in the sense that even though it's a very heavily populated state, the number of defense firms are limited, particularly for medical malpractice. And I started asking my clients for referrals. The first attorney who ever gave me a case, whose name is Peter, sat down with me and I said, Peter, I'd like you to give me the names of 10 attorneys who you think I should approach about working on cases.
Mhm.
And he gave me 5 plaintiff and 5 defense attorneys. Now, today, that would be a very big ask. If you
Right.
get one person as a referral, you're thrilled. But I didn't know any better, so I said 10 people. So I went down the list and I contacted all of them, and they gave me cases. And it just continued
Right.
that I got medical surgical expert witness cases. I was also consulting with some local hospitals about quality improvement, and I was teaching for a seminar company who sent me all over the United States and Canada to teach about nursing documentation and quality improvement. I did that for 2 years. So all of those forms of income helped to sustain me. And then one day, those light bulb moments when you get a phone call that completely changes your life. I got a call from a plaintiff attorney saying, I've got an emergency department case and I need you to be my expert. Well, a nurse is not a nurse is not a nurse. And I said, I'm a nursing expert witness, but it's for medical surgical cases. I haven't worked in the emergency department, but I have a friend who is a clinical specialist and she would be a wonderful expert for you. I called her up and said, Chris, are you interested in becoming an expert witness? She said, well, I don't know anything about it. And I said, I'll show you what to do. So I put her together with him and I walked away and I thought, well, that was a real good favor that I did both of them. But is there a way you can make money by doing what I just did?
Mhm.
And it turned out that that was indeed a way to help attorneys without me needing to be the expert all the time. Now, this seems so simple and straightforward, but at that time, it didn't occur to me that I could expand my business.
Right.
So I started getting more calls. I need an OR nurse. I need a pediatric nurse. I need a critical care nurse. I need a nursing home nurse. And the word got around to my clients that I could provide people who were well qualified to review their nursing malpractice cases. That was the leap forward in my business that ultimately made it a saleable business because I wasn't the one doing all of the work.
Right. Right. And around what era was that? What about year was that when the light bulb moment hit?
Oh,
I'm
1989.
curious. Okay.
1989. That's what I consider the start of Med League support services to be in 1989 when I got that call. The
Mhm.
first person I turned to was Chris and said, I'd like to get you under contract so that the next case that I receive, I can bill for your services. I'll handle all the invoicing and collection for
Right.
you. I'll educate you more. I'll provide you with support. I'll help you grow in this role. And she reviewed cases for me, that first person, for the next 25 years.
Wow. That's amazing. I love that. And I love that you just listened to that light bulb moment and you pursued something that was, you pioneered something that hadn't already been in place. And I'm sure that you made it easy for those that wanted to participate. You would, and then word gets around, I'm sure, like, oh, if you need a critical care nurse, gets around very easy because even back then, I'm sure the nursing community, is kind of a small community. One nurse knows another nurse who knows another nurse. Um, Okay, so that was around the time. Was it mostly, it was just expert witness work back then? Is
It
that
started
correct?
with just expert, and then attorneys started looking for things like I need a chronology, I need literature, I need a case
Mhm.
screen for merit. I began expanding my services,
Right.
ultimately offering people who would observe DMEs was not a significant portion, but a component as well.
Hmm.
And there was a lot of work for attorneys who were looking for people who were experienced. They trusted me. They
Right.
knew that if I had leftover money from a retainer, that I would return it to them. That was a revelation because
Hmm.
they worked with particularly some physician experts who would charge a flat fee. And whether they spent 1 hour or 4 hours, the attorney never saw anything come back. So my clients began recognizing that I was trustworthy, that I had integrity, that I wouldn't take a case just because I wanted to bill for it, even though I knew right off the bat that it was a case that was not likely to be valid.
Hmm.
They would call me up and say, I've got a woman in my office right now, and here's what she's telling me. And, sometimes they were very straightforward. And I want to be clear that that's not something I did right in the beginning. I had to get to a very experienced level before I could hear, oh, they perforated the colon during the colonoscopy. Well, did the surgeon recognize it at the time? Oh, he recognized it and took the patient into the OR. Sorry, that's a risk of having a colonoscopy, which
Right.
we should all think about, by the way, when we have our colonoscopies, that somebody could be poking a hole right through your
Yes, I
intestine,
know.
but it's when they send the patient home and ignore the call that says, I've got a fever, I've got pain, I've got GI symptoms. Oh, you're fine. Just take Tylenol. Those are the cases that have value.
Right. Right. Actually, that's a very, very good point in understanding the difference between risk and you know, breaching that standard of following up and answering the phone calls and those kind of things. So that's a good little nugget for those of you out there. I'm sure you put it right in your pocket there. Okay, so you clearly were building this community of nurses in the expert witness world, as well as I'm sure that you were using them to help these chronologies or these merit reviews, or sending people for DMEs. Did you at one point did you have another aha moment? I'm guessing you've had many aha moments where you were, you know I can educate, because I know you do that and you have done that, because I've seen plenty of your education in this community. When did that come about, when you decided that you were going to kind of teach this to not only those you were currently working with, but more than that.
I had invitations from ALNC to submit proposals to teach at our annual conference, which I took advantage of.
Mm-hmm.
I was on the board of directors and spent a year as a president of ALNC about 20 years ago at this point,
Wow. Okay.
and had the opportunity to look at the profession on a different level.
Mm.
You're at a much higher plane when you're running an organization and being on the board of directors. And I also knew that eventually I would want to sell the company. My husband is from India, and the winters in New Jersey would always catch him by surprise, even though
Mm.
he knew they were coming.
Mm.
Pat, it's getting cold. Well, yes, it's November, and that's what happens in November. And he really did not want to spend winters with freezing rain and sleet in particular. It's real nasty. I know you're a California girl, and
I
I'm sure
know. I couldn't do it.
you can imagine, pulling
Yeah.
out of your driveway and you want your car to go in one direction and it goes in a different
Mm-mm.
direction, or
Yeah.
stopping at a light and your car is all of a sudden all over the road.
Yeah. No.
That gets real old.
Mm-hmm.
So we decided that I would sell the company. I would, first of all, look for a buyer. And
Mm-hmm.
then in transition, because all I could envision was, well, I would sell the company, but what would I do then? I couldn't sit on the sofa and watch television, and
Yeah.
I can't watch movies, and there's only so many books that you can read over the course of a day or a week. The idea of coaching and teaching seemed like a very natural transition to take what I've learned from building a very successful business and helping other people build their own successful businesses.
Mm-hmm.
That was the bridge that enabled me to say, okay, I'm going to walk out on January 2nd from that closing, 2015, and walk back into my company the following Monday and announce that I've sold the company.
Mm-hmm.
And then I spent 3 months with the new owner, and then I was done.
Wow. Wow, that's amazing. That, and I don't know if many people have heard that story or know that story about you. I did happen to see that. I did not know that about your business until I was doing some extra research and saw that you had sold your company. And um, I can only imagine what that felt like. It was like, I'm sure releasing this baby of yours was probably not easy, but knowing that you were kind of on the next path, made it more reasonable. But I'm guessing that, did you have a hard time letting go of that, or were you just, you were ready?
When you build a baby from the ground up and you nurture that baby, that is your baby. So there's a level of possessiveness that comes along with letting go and watching somebody else run the company.
Mm-hmm.
I am glad that I wasn't required to be there more than 3 months.
Okay, yeah.
I have heard of new owners who have required a year, 2 years, 5 years, which I have also heard is excruciating for the original business owner,
Right.
and often something that doesn't end up lasting. Oh, I've got a year contract, but at 6 months, I'm out of here. I'm done.
Yeah. Yeah. Hard to watch your baby. Yeah. I can imagine. Okay. So then now we've handed this off and we've taken on this new adventure into educating others and really, making this something bigger than what you currently had. What was exciting to you about taking this new phase on?
It's a way to continue to learn. It's a way to
Mhm.
continue to help people.
Mhm.
There is a different landscape now in legal nurse consulting than when I started in 1987. Clearly, many more people who have been educated, many people who are looking for answers on how to get started, how to build their businesses.
Right.
I wanted to be clear that working with trial attorneys is not easy. They are a demanding group. They're good at negotiating. They're intelligent people. Many of them are highly invested in caring for their clients, but it's not a population that comes with very straightforward instructions on how to get along with them. And I found that to be challenging. In many ways, I compare working with trial attorneys like working with physicians who are also highly intelligent, dedicated. Many of them want, all right, Anna, tell me the patient's vital signs. What's the situation? And you've got to be able to go and pull it together to answer a series of rapid fire questions. Working with attorneys is much like that. I had the good fortune of connecting with an attorney in 1995 when I was exhibiting in Manhattan, who saw the value immediately in what I could offer him when he showed me a bottle of potassium chloride when I went to his office to deliver a prize that he won. And we talked about this potassium chloride overdose that this neonate had received. And he immediately got it. Like, I saw something in the case that all the doctors missed, which was that this KCL was given by IV push. And I told him that that would very likely be against the policies of the hospital and that he needed to obtain the policy on which drugs nurses could give by IV push. And he said, is there such a policy? And I said, I am sure there's such a policy because I was responsible for making sure the nurses knew about it and that we did in-services on it. He said, well, none of the doctors who looked at this case told me about this policy. Well, it's because a nurse brings a different dimension of help to your cases. Okay. So from 1995 until 2015, when I sold the company, he gave me cases. And then when my 5-year non-compete was over and I could begin working with attorneys again after I sold the company, then he called me up and said, I've got a case. And I worked on that case with him for the next 3 years and 9 months. And it settled in September for $11.9 million.
Wow. Wow. What an impact. What an impact a nurse has like you. I mean, just the knowledge and your, fortitude and, understanding what their lack of understanding is and understanding what they need and understanding, the nurse. There's so many of that. I think I try to express that in each of these episodes that there are so many of us out there that have so much knowledge that we don't necessarily give ourselves credit for. The fact that that there's a policy about this. We all know that there are policies about certain things that in our specialty, and that's incredibly valuable. And so knowing our value, I think, is really key, because I think also as nurses, we tend to want to help others. We don't necessarily sit in that moment of the fact that we have this knowledge that we are incredibly valuable. And right there, you just shared just one tiny, not tiny, obviously it's a monumental way of being that valuable nurse that one attorney saw in, and thinking of how many are out there that can really just use the value of a nurse. So that's just my little, everyone out there, you're very valuable. Please understand that you are valuable, and that Pat just shared why. I appreciate you sharing that. Okay, so I mean, we could talk forever. I could sit here and talk to you forever. I want to talk a little bit more into. I know you are an author of many books. What drove you into writing, first of all? And I know you teach writing as well, but what drove you into writing um, in the legal nurse community? And I know that you write as well outside of that. I believe. Share a little bit about your
Mhm.
author focus.
I had a high school English teacher who encouraged me and saw my talent. And I enjoyed the part in college when I had assignments to write,
Mm,
reports, term papers. The first book that I had published came from a self learning module that I created with two other nurse educators. We had a group of hospitals in Trenton, New Jersey, and we had a group of in service educators, which was the term used at that time, staff development instructors. All three of our hospitals in Trenton were told there's this new thing called nursing diagnosis, and we want you to teach the staff about nursing diagnosis. That was in the 1980s.
mm-hmm.
So, seeing an opportunity for collaboration, I suggested to two other people, how about if we go and work on something together that we could all three use without each of us having to replicate that product? That self learning module turned into the first book that I co authored with them. And
Mm-hmm.
that book, which was published by W.B. Saunders, which I believe has been long since bought up by another publishing company, that book then enabled me to feel comfortable approaching attorneys and offering my services as an expert.
Right.
So the first several books that I wrote were published by traditional publishers.
Mm-hmm.
And then when being able to self publish became so easy, I started switching over to publishing my own books
Mm-hmm.
rather than going through traditional publishers.
Right. Right. So you obviously you love to write, and using that as a, I don't want to say marketing tool. It's really you're really sharing your knowledge. The fact that you are an author sets you above, your competition, because it's a way for your potential clients to really see your work ahead of time. Um, for those that don't necessarily, um, I've given myself as an example. I clearly love books. If you look behind me, I love to read books. Most of these are business or personal development books. I've always said I would love to write a book of my turns and, my travels in life.
Mhm.
But I don't necessarily see myself as a writer because I am my worst critic. What would you say to someone who, and I know that you teach writing, what would you say to someone who would love to write a book? And especially now in this self publishing world, would love to write a book, but are concerned that are not the strongest in writers. Would that still be a possibility for someone? Or um, if you're a great writer, you could write books. If you're not a great writer, find something else. What would you say to someone in that world?
Well, if you're not a great writer, which is what I hear underlying the question, there are editors who can make your output smooth. That's
Right.
part of what I do is being
Mm-hmm.
an editor.
Mm-hmm.
But the editor can't create the content. The
Mm-hmm.
editor can smooth out the content.
Mm-hmm.
The editor can say, you know, Anna, I don't think putting the recipe for your mother's spaghetti sauce belongs in chapter 2. I don't think you should put
Right.
any recipes in your book, period. And you can tell, and I'm thinking about a book that I read several years ago that was a mixture of recipes and chunks of content that were repeated
Mm-hmm.
in the book. It was about how her husband, she believed her husband had been killed by the mob. But the book itself was so poorly put together that I could tell immediately she'd never given it to an editor, because an editor would have said, wait a minute, you just said this in chapter 1, and then you copied that whole section of text, and immediately it appears in the same chapter. Like, this is sloppy. When you become interested in writing, legal nurse consulting is a great way to improve your skills, because there's so much emphasis on being able to communicate well.
Right.
I can tell you from having proofread reports for my expert witnesses over the years that many of them improved in their writing skills. And there were a few who had great clinical knowledge but couldn't write coherently. You can't be persuasive in this field if you can't make an interesting report that tightly argues the points that you want to make. And you're writing it always thinking in mind of how the other side is going to combat the points. So you're proactively addressing them if you're on the plaintiff side, and reactively addressing them if you're on the defense side. You do have to have good writing skills to be a legal nurse consultant. You can become greater and better as you do more reports, and you can improve your skills. You can read books about editing. Writing a book is a similar process where you're focusing your ideas, creating an outline, looking at this as objectively as you can. And then when you hire an editor, you say, all right, tell me what you think needs to be changed. And you don't sit there and say, oh, but I love it just the way that I wrote it. You can't improve upon my work. Oh, don't change that. Oh, please, I love those sentences. You might as well not spend your money on an editor.
Right.
It makes me think, Anna, of a woman who did a report for me, and it required extensive editing. It was very poorly written. And she said, no one has ever given me this kind of feedback about my report. I will never work with you again. I thought, okay, if you're not coachable and you can't accept that somebody else can improve your written report, then that's fine. I have other people I can turn to when I need an expert witness review.
Yeah.
And she's the clearest example I can share of somebody who could not open her mind at that time. She may have changed. I don't know, because I haven't had any more contact with her, but couldn't open her mind to the idea that her writing could be improved.
Right.
If you have that much ego in your way that you view your work product, then you're not going to get better. And she had incomplete sentences and content that was jumbled out of order, and it needed to be edited.
Yeah.
And I did. Much to her
That's a
horror.
really good point. I think so. Basically, what you're telling me is you have to be coachable and be ready to be coached if you want a successful piece of work. And I think that that's really, I think it's probably ego. It's probably ego, and it's probably fear of being judged. I would imagine fear of being judged because, I don't know, we like to think that we're smart, but if you're not coachable, then there's no point in doing it. It's a really good point, though, is to be coachable as well. And I find that a lot of new nurses a lot of nurses are coming into this field. And I will say I have not been in this field for very long, but even since I've been in it, new and more and more new nurses are coming into this field and wanting to be available for subcontracting and doing, working with someone, and being coachable is what, 99% of those that have been doing this a long time have said: be coachable, be coachable, be coachable. So I think that is just number one. is a good reminder. Not only writing a book, if you want to write a book, be coachable, but also in your legal nurse field, be coachable. Even if you're doing it independently, be coachable and be open for, feedback from others, because it is not being judged. I think that that's a big, I think that nurses in general, even starting a new business, they're in fear of being judged. I don't know why, but I think that fear keeps things close to the vest. And if you're not coachable and you kind of move that fear, then moving forward or getting better, improving is really hard to do. So,
Well, it
you
makes me
said,
think,
yeah.
Anna, when we're new graduates and we come out of school and we've got a basic level of knowledge, and if we're fortunate, we get teamed up with a preceptor who shows us the ropes.
Right.
I can think of people who went through the orientation program that I set up who would say things in class like, well, where I came from, we didn't do it that way. We had a different way of doing it. Why are you doing it this way? And after a while, it got a little old. Like,
Right.
I'm sure it was wonderful from where you were, but you're here now, and let's talk about how we do it. It's uncomfortable to be put back into a learning mode, particularly for people with a lot of experience who have not had that feedback of, yes, there is a better way to do it. So I think when you bring up the concept of fear and being judged, there is a lot at stake when you're working with attorneys. You have one shot to make that great first impression and to get repeat work. Or if you turn over inferior work in the attorney's eyes, whether that was truly inferior or not, then you end up with collection problems. As an example, an attorney who said to me, I want you to give me a detailed chronology of the first week of this admission. We gave him a detailed chronology, 30 pages, $3,000 invoice. And he said, I didn't expect 30 pages. And I didn't expect to be charged this much. I expected 5 or 6 pages. Well, when you say detailed chronology to a legal nurse consultant, that's a different concept. So I had to negotiate with him to get paid at least a portion of what he owed of that 3,000. And I said to him, when we work together again, it would be helpful if you gave me a sample of what you were looking for, what you expected. I never heard from him again. And that didn't surprise me. I was disappointed, but I knew that we had a very different image in our minds, his image of what he would get and our reality of what we gave him. So I always stress when I talk to nurses that it's important to have a clear understanding with your client. What is your client expecting? Does the client want a particular format? Is there a length that the client has in mind? Is there a degree of detail the client wants? We are bred to be people pleasers as nurses. And now we've got not a patient to please or a doctor to please, but an attorney client who is looking for some specific help. And if that attorney can articulate it to you before you put 20, 30, 40, 80 hours into the case, you're going to end up much better in terms of satisfaction and getting your invoices paid.
Right. And repeat business too.
Yes.
If they find that your, reports are incredibly valuable because you provided exactly what they were looking for, then the chances of you being hired again is quite high. So that's really helpful. I have a question, one last question, kind of in that same world, is what if, I know that this was my experience in the beginning. What if your attorney doesn't know what they don't know? I don't know. You just give me what I think I need. They're not very clear with giving you direction, or they just say, I trust. 'Cause let me tell you, that's happened on many occasions when I first started, and I was just starting. So I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to assume this is what you want. Thankfully, the reports were what they wanted, but it was really difficult if you don't have that clear direction. What you can do. I don't know if that's like just an open-ended question, not really a specific question, but what can you do if they don't give you that clear advice?
There are attorneys who are not sure. One possibility is to send them a redacted report that you did in another case and ask, is this the format that you're looking for? Being as probing as possible. What are your theories of this case? Why did you take this case? What are you concerned about in this case? If you can pull out any of those things, it's helpful. And also listen for, is the attorney going to use words like, I have a budget, I can't put a lot of hours into this, or perhaps it's a case that needs to be screened for merit. There are some cases that you can look at fairly quickly and come to a decision. That doesn't mean that you're going to do a detailed chronology on a case that has no merit. You're going to consider the attorney's resources, because whatever money he has to pay you is likely going to be coming out of the attorney's pocket.
Right.
So they're concerned about budget issues and how much is this going to cost me? That's one of the questions that I hear a lot from attorneys. Now, can you tell me how many hours is it going to take you to do this? Well, let's see. My crystal ball has a crack in it right now. I can't tell you over the phone without seeing how much there is in the way of medical records. But how about if you send me the case and then I can give you an estimate or an approximation?
Right.
So I would say, to answer your question, Anna, to be as probing as you can to get as much clarity as possible before you embark down the path, and then stay in touch with the attorney. I have put 7 hours into this case, and here's where I am, and this is how much I expect it's going to take to finish it. And that feedback can help you along the way.
Right. And they're never too busy. I've found, for me, we don't like to bother people, but what I have found on that same topic is that they're appreciative, even though they're busy. They're appreciative of the check-in. Oh, that's great. I appreciate you checking in, and you're not a bother. Which I found very interesting because they seem to be very busy, and but they're always appreciative of the check-in, and I love the fact that you just probe, just keep asking them. If they're not giving you, they're not giving you the information you need, ask specific questions. Hard time saying that. Ask specific questions to guide yourself down the road. It's only helping you. Okay, so I appreciate your time, Pat. I could talk to you all day long because you're just such a wealth of knowledge, and I love hearing your backstory, and I'm excited that you shared all of that with us. So I appreciate your time. And if you can tell the audience, and of course this will be in the show notes, but if you can tell the audience where we can find you, and if you have anything going on at the end of this year that you would like people to know about.
Sure. My website is legalnursebusiness.com, legalnursebusiness.com. We're running a series of free power sessions for LNCs that you can sign up for at that website. And our next semi-annual conference is going to be February 27, 28, and March 1. Those are LNC Success online conferences in which we spend 3 days focused on building your skills and building your business.
Perfect. Thank you. I appreciate you sharing that. And make sure you reach out and say hi to Pat. And thank you again for your time and sharing that with us.
You're welcome.
Thank you for joining us in this fun conversation on the Limitless Legal Nurse Consulting podcast. I hope you found this episode as inspiring and empowering as I always do. And I hope that you share this episode with your friends. If you enjoyed it, I would love it if you could leave us a review or comment, as I would love to share them in the future episodes. Or hop on over into my DMs and send me a quick message. I can be found on Instagram at anna.b.gray, on my website at limitlesslnc.com, and over on LinkedIn at anna.gray. And I want you to remember, you are limitless. Until next time.